Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Shelby Ward hadn't heard from her sister Susan for days. This was concerning. They had last talked on Thursday, June 8, 1989. Susan had been staying at the Landmark, a mid-range hotel in Pikeville, Kentucky, for several days. She wasn't supposed to be there. The man she had followed out there was married and didn't seem thrilled to see her. But Susan desperately needed to talk to him. She had been trying to convince him for weeks that the baby she was carrying was his and that he needed to step up and agree to pay child support or, better yet, leave his wife like he had been saying he would for the duration of their nearly 2-year-long affair. The last time Susan talked to Shelby, she said the conversations hadn't made much headway. Mostly, she and her lover had just slept together. Susan went on and on about what a great body he had, how he was so in shape it made her weak in the knees. Geez, that's great, Shelby said, but what about the baby? Susan said he didn't want to talk about it. He wasn't even sure it was his. Somehow, Susan didn't seem nearly as offended by that as Shelby was. But then, Shelby had been listening to her sister gush about this married man for well over a year. She knew more than anyone just how obsessed Susan had become. This guy was all the woman talked about. He was so much more sophisticated than her own ex-husband, Kenneth. He was worldly and smart and ambitious and going places. And he made her feel special. Well, most of the time. More than that, though, he promised her a better life for herself and her 2 children. She'd get to move away from rural Kentucky, where she had felt shackled pretty much her whole life. She felt surrounded by hillbillies and yokels and, worst of all, criminals. For Pete's sake, a literal bank robber had been renting a room in her home. She lived off welfare, illegally scamming it from 2 states by telling one she lived just past the border in the other, and vice versa. Even then, she wasn't able to keep herself afloat. Not all of Susan's woes were inflicted by others or unfortunate circumstances, though. She had made bad choices herself. Any luxuries she had managed to buy came courtesy of the cocaine she dealt on the side, a hobby her lover should have dissuaded but didn't. Shelby would later recall that the last time the sisters talked, Susan said she missed her kids. She asked Shelby to go check on them. Shelby said, of course. And then she said, Susan, why don't you come back home? Get your boyfriend to drive you the hour's commute from Pikeville to Freeburn, Kentucky. Something doesn't feel right here. Come on home. Susan seemed to relent. Yeah, okay. I'll have him drive me back tonight or tomorrow morning. But Friday and Saturday passed, and Shelby heard nothing. Come Sunday, she was sick with worry. She tried not to panic because, given the circumstances, she could think of countless reasons Susan might have gone radio silent for a stint. Maybe she and her boyfriend were finally hashing out their plans for the future. Maybe she was headed home and just had no way to call. Maybe she had taken a detour to visit some other friends like she had hinted was possible at one point. In truth, though, none of these possibilities seemed totally likely, but they were plausible enough that Shelby could quiet her fears. A mutual friend called about 5 p.m. Sunday and asked if Susan had come home from Pikeville. No, Shelby said. Weird, said the friend. She should have gotten there by now. So Shelby swung by Kenneth's house to see if maybe Susan went there to see the kids. Susan's relationship with Kenneth was notoriously on again, off again, and it was totally possible that she had run back to him yet again, especially if she'd been ousted by her boyfriend. Kenneth said he hadn't seen her in almost a week. The friend back in Pikeville called again. No sign of Susan, he said, but he had found all of her clothes, shoes, and makeup in a paper bag in her hotel room. She'd even left her hairbrush by the sink. Shelby was in full panic mode now. What the hell had happened to her sister? She had no way of knowing it at the time, but the answer to that question would take a year to surface. And when it did, it would shock more than just her hometown of Freeburn. It would shake an entire federal law enforcement agency to its core. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Mint Mobile. I've been in full where is all our money going mode lately.
End of the school year will do that to a person.
Suddenly I'm looking at every monthly bill a little bit harder.
And phone bills are one of those things that people just accept.
Right. I mean, ours doesn't fluctuate, but every month I look at it and I think this is just a lot, which is why Mint Mobile caught my attention.
Because they're basically asking why wireless has to cost so much in the first place.
Right. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month, which is dramatically less than what most people are paying.
And you're not giving up the basics either.
Nope. You still get high-speed data and unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network. And I've heard really good things from people I know. My friend John switched and said moving his number over was surprisingly easy.
Now, that's the part everybody dreads.
Exactly. But you can bring your own phone and number, activate with an eSIM in minutes, and avoid the whole long contract situation.
Which honestly sounds great.
If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/COTC. That's mintmobile.com/COTC. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Freeburn, Kentucky isn't a proper city. It's one of those tiny hollows that's designated in the census but is technically unincorporated. You probably shouldn't be able to find it on a map. Its population as of the 2020 census was less than 300, but longtimers in Pike County will easily give you directions if you're looking for it, though it's hard to imagine why you would be. Most people who live there have ties to the coal industry. In fact, the place originally was called Liss, as in Liss Hatfield, when the post office was established there in 1911, but the name shifted to Freeburn in 1932 in honor of the free-burning coal mines in the area, which is both hilly and rural. Pikeville is less than 40 miles away and is Pike County's county seat. Now, that's a proper city, albeit still a small one. Its population is less than 8,000. Still, the place serves as an economic, educational, and entertainment hub, not just for Eastern Kentucky, but also for Virginia and West Virginia. Susan Daniels was born in 1961 in Mattawan, West Virginia, a 7-mile drive from Freeburn, where she and her 8 siblings were raised. Susan was the 5th born. She was a descendant of a guy called Devil Anse Hatfield, who headed up the Hatfield clan. Your brow might be furrowing right now in that, am I supposed to know what you're talking about kind of way? And the answer is, you might know a little more than you realize. Think Hatfield McCoy. Sounds familiar, right? I haven't done an episode on them yet, so I'll save the nitty-gritty details for another time. But the phrase Hatfield McCoy refers to an infamous feud between 2 19th-century American families who straddled the border of West Virginia and Kentucky. Devil Anse's Christian name was William Anderson Hatfield. He headed up the Hatfields, who lived in West Virginia. The Kentucky clan was helmed by Randolph Ole Randall McCoy. According to regional lore, the feud began during the Civil War, in which the Hatfields fought for the Confederacy and the McCoys the Union. Here's Jack Hatfield, the great-great-great-grandson of Devil Anse.
The Tug River Valley, straddling the Kentucky-West Virginia border, was torn between Union and Confederate loyalties. This division set the stage for bloodshed, starting with the murder of Asa Harmon McCoy. a Union veteran, by Jim Vance, the uncle of Devil Anse Hatfield. The killing lit a fuse in the valley, forcing the community to choose sides.
Tensions just kept growing, mostly over land, but occasionally over a hog. Once there was a Romeo-Juliet love affair between members of the clans, too. But things got really ugly in 1882 when Devil Anse's brother, Ellison, was stabbed some 24 times and shot in a Pike County brawl on Election Day. Devil Anse decided the McCoys were responsible and alerted the local police. Oh no, wait, that's not how the Hatfields responded. They tied several McCoy family members to pawpaw trees and executed them. This back and forth continued for years, with the county clerk's office recording dozens of violent deaths that investigations found were seemingly unprovoked. It made the area feel terribly unsafe for those who valued safety, and so those folks moved out, leaving just the violent hungry behind. I'll cut this short here, but it's important to know this violence marred the region. It hurt the area's reputation and ensured that legit business folk didn't invest there, leaving few opportunities for those who happened to be born in the vicinity. Not forever, of course. I'm not trying to smear the area, which is scenic and historic and littered with cool B&Bs and businesses catering to outdoor adventures. But it was pretty poor when Susan Daniels was growing up, and still poor when she started slinging drugs there. Now, Susan's siblings were largely content with the region. Susan, not so much. She always had dreams of moving away and starting fresh somewhere new. As a child, she went to school in Freeburn, but she dropped out at 15 to get a job to help her family. Her father, Sid Daniels, had been a hard worker most of his life, juggling one job in the mines and another cutting mining timber on the weekends. But he was laid off while Susan was still young because he had hurt his wrist so badly with the repetitive motions both jobs required. He also got black lung after working in the mines for 18 years, but because he was a smoker, he wasn't eligible for compensation from the coal companies. Because Sid was out of work, his children often had to do without. They were mocked by other kids for wearing third-hand clothes and ratty shoes. Susan took this especially hard. She wasn't satisfied by the yard sale clothes her siblings got. She demanded her parents figure out a way to get her new clothes from a discount department store in Matawan. She would play dress-up and carry around a parasol. The kids slept in rooms crowded with 2 beds apiece, 2 kids to each bed. They had a small black and white television set that only got 3 stations and didn't have a washing machine at all. All the kids had jobs to do around the house. The girls would clean and dust and can fruits and vegetables, while the boys would do repair work and help Sid slaughter a hog each year. Around the same time Susan left school, she also fell in love with a guy named Kenneth Smith. Her parents were not happy about this. She was 15 to Kenneth's 22, and she seemed to lose her head around him. He would drive her around on the back of his motorcycle, then drop her back off at home, only to pick her up again after the rest of the house was sleeping. How she managed to sneak away from such a small house is beyond me, but it does seem that some of the kids were happy to keep each other's secrets from ever reaching Mom and Dad. Now, Kenneth was a good-looking guy with dark hair and green eyes. He liked to wear a cowboy hat with boots and had a habit of rolling a cigarette pack in his t-shirt sleeve like a greaser from The Outsiders. The age difference bothered Susan's parents, of course, but more than that, they were disturbed by Kenneth's career path. He sold drugs. PCP, cocaine, pot, acid, you name it. Susan seemed to think this was cool. She definitely liked the luxuries it afforded her. Soon, she was working with Kenneth, handling some of his deals for him. Kenneth told author Aphrodite Jones, quote, "Susan would handle the drug business for me whenever I wasn't around. Back then, you didn't care who you sold to, so there was a lot of money coming in. I'd stop in on a Saturday and she'd hand me $1,800 or $2,200. She liked being involved in it because she had everything she wanted, end quote. She also partook of the product. Whatever hope Susan's family had of bringing her back home was quickly obliterated. She was high half the time and had enough money to buy expensive clothes at nice stores, not just discount ones. Once Sid realized his daughter was out of reach, he kicked her out of the house, thinking it might scare her straight. Well, it didn't. She didn't move in with Kenneth right away, though. He was happy to sleep with her, but he wasn't keen on fully committing himself to a teenager. So Susan would bounce around places to stay, sometimes landing with an older married sibling like Shelby, or sometimes a friend or a cousin. Eventually, Kenneth, who had been living in a mobile home, sold his trailer and moved with Susan into his mother's home. At first, it didn't bother Susan that Kenneth wasted a lot of the money he quote-unquote earned selling drugs. He would buy other people things, expensive gifts or rounds of drinks, and he would blow a lot gambling. In November 1979, he finally got busted when he sold PCP to an undercover cop. Instead of facing trial, he and Susan fled to Monroe, Louisiana. She was 17 years old. While in Louisiana, the couple got word about one of Kenneth's friends, Carl Cat Eyes Lockhart, age 23. Here's former FBI agent Jim Huggins.
Cat Eyes Lockhart had committed several bank robberies,
including the biggest bank heist in Virginia history, worth $311,000. That's in 1980 money. Today, that translates to more than $1.1 million. After the robbery, Lockhart went on the run, showing up at Kenneth and Susan's Louisiana home with Kenneth's brother, Roy, in tow. Cat Eyes showed the couple what $100,000 looked like during that visit. Then, he set about spending it as irresponsibly as he could. He even lost about $10,000 of his dough to Kenneth in poker games. Within 2 months of the bank robbery, Lockhart ended up back home, broke. He was soon arrested in Vulcan, West Virginia, and convicted in part on testimony from Roy, who said he had planned to help with the heist, but backed out at the last minute and was replaced by another accomplice. You'd think that Roy Smith ratting on him might have started a brand new regional feud between two families, but you'd be wrong. Lockhart stayed on good terms with the entire Smith clan. That loyalty would eventually cost Susan everything. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Wild Grain. So I was traveling this week and had some genuinely amazing food.
I was getting photo updates constantly.
As you should. But one of the things I still missed was having wild grain pastries at home in the morning.
That's actually a pretty strong endorsement.
It surprised me too, but there's something really nice about having good bread and pastries just ready to go at home.
Especially because you don't have to plan ahead.
Wild Grain is a bake from frozen box with sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas, and everything bakes in 25 minutes or less with no thawing. And the quality is legitimately good. The croissants especially, they taste like something from an actual bakery.
And the boxes are customizable too.
Right, they've got variety boxes, gluten-free, vegan, even a protein-focused box now. Imagine having fresh bakery-quality bread, pastries, and pasta at home without any trips to the store. And don't just take my word for it. They have over 40,000 five-star reviews and have been voted the best food subscription box by USA Today for 3 years in a row. For a limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off your first box plus free croissants for life when you go to wildgrain.com/COTC to start your subscription today. That's $30 off your first box and free croissants for life when you visit wildgrain.com/COTC, or you can use promo code COTC at checkout. Susan Daniels and Kenneth Smith moved from Louisiana to Columbus, Indiana in 1980. Their relationship had gone through some patchy spots, but this move marked the beginning of a tranquil period. Kenneth used some of the money he had won off Cat Eyes Lockhart to buy a mobile home, and Susan worked hard to decorate it so it felt homey. The couple joined a church, rarely argued, and spent time doing things together, like fishing for carp on the river. Kenneth even took a regular job laying floors and ceilings. They still used drugs, but they weren't dealing anymore. For more than a year, they felt stable and in love. They got married in a simple ceremony on February 5th, 1981. And by simple, I mean no flowers, no fancy rings, no big dress. They exchanged vows in blue jeans, with Kenneth repurposing a turquoise ring he had already gifted her years before. About 6 months later, Susan learned she was pregnant. Daughter Miranda was born in March 1982. Not long after, Kenneth got hurt on the job. He said he could no longer work construction, but doctors who examined him disagreed. They refused to sign off on paperwork that would have allowed him to apply for unemployment or workers' comp. He previously would have turned to his brother Roger for help, but Roger had been having problems of his own and, in fact, had pulled a bank robbery with his wife using techniques he had heard Cat Eyes bragging about. Difference was, Roger and his wife were caught straight away. They'd eventually serve prison time. Out of work and in back pain, Kenneth couldn't keep up with the bills, so he decided to sell the mobile home Susan had worked so hard on and move back to Kentucky. Once there, he and Susan again hung their shingle as the neighborhood dope dealer. To keep his past from sneaking up on him, remember Kenneth was already a fugitive from his earlier arrest, he turned himself in to police and arranged a plea deal. He got 5 years probation. Around this time, the couple's relationship began to struggle. Susan no longer saw Kenneth as a handsome, hog-riding rebel. Now she saw him as a drug-addicted slouch who couldn't care for his family. He'd had a history of cheating on her, too, and she began to follow suit. Her siblings said she would become infatuated with one guy after another, talking about him like he would finally be the one to rescue her from Freeburn. But it would never work out, and she would end up back with Kenneth. The couple got pregnant again in late 1984. Then they did something a bit weird. They got divorced. Oh, that's not the weird part. The weird part is that they weren't planning on splitting, but they got divorced anyway. That way, the government would recognize each of them as a single parent with partial visitation rights. As such, Susan qualified for monthly money from a Kentucky program called Aid to Dependent Children. The two of them separately qualified for food stamps and Social Security insurance, too. It helped them make ends meet. After their March 1985 divorce, the couple was, strangely, on solid footing again. Their son Brady was born on August 1st. They lived in a rented house, paid for by the West Virginia Housing Authority, in Susan's name only, in Vulcan. It was a cute house, but Susan felt isolated and Kenneth started gambling again. Their roller coaster ride of a relationship was in another lull. Kenneth began letting his bank-robbing buddies stay in the house and, as Susan told friends and family, hitting her when she complained. Jones wrote in her book about the case, quote, "Domestic violence was now a part of Susan's daily life. Although Kenneth claims he never beat Susan, he admits he threatened her on several occasions," end quote. Susan's brother, oddly named Tennis, witnessed abuse when he stayed with the Smiths in 1986. He said Susan wanted to leave the relationship, but didn't know how. She could have kicked Kenneth out, but if he didn't go willingly, she would have had to explain to authorities why she had been collecting benefits as a supposedly single woman, even though the couple never actually lived apart. Then, things around the house changed in the summer of '86. Cat Eyes Lockhart got paroled and crashed in a back room of the Smiths' house. He brought a duffel bag of guns with him and grand schemes to rob as many banks as he could manage. The robberies made headlines. Now, Susan didn't have much schooling, but she wasn't an idiot. She noticed the guns and the excess cash that ebbed and flowed. Cat Eyes would show up with big wads of money, then take off for weeks at a time. Then he'd come back and use the Smith home as an operating base for his next enterprise. Wash, rinse, repeat. Neither he nor the Smiths knew that federal agents were already tracking his every move. Mark Stephen Putnam was a new hire to the FBI's two-person bureau in Pikeville. Born to a middle-class family in Coventry, Connecticut, he was one of 3 children.
His father was a truck driver for Sears, and his mother was a stay-at-home mom.
That's psychologist Todd Grande, who covered the case in an episode on his YouTube channel. Mark grew up with chiseled good looks and a flair for athletics, playing baseball, basketball, and soccer.
When Mark was young, he was described as introverted and private. However, when he was playing sports, he was highly competitive and aggressive. It was almost like he was 2 different people.
He was an excellent soccer player, earning himself an athletic scholarship to Pomfret School, a prep school 50 miles from home. Though he didn't have the same money his peers had, he had their respect. The school paper referred to him as Captain Putt in game stories. Once he hit college, he zeroed in on a career in law enforcement, enrolling in the University of Tampa and majoring in criminology. He told everyone that his dream job was to become an FBI agent. 3 months after graduating in 1982, he got a job as a clerk in the Connecticut FBI headquarters. 2 years later, he married a woman named Kathleen Ponticelli, a woman his mom had literally picked up at a bar for him. As in, she saw a beautiful woman, chatted her up, then called her son and said, "Hey, I've got someone here you should meet. Seems like she'd make a good wife and mother." Mark went to the bar, and his mom was right. He and Kathy hit it off straight away. Soon after their April 1984 wedding, Kathy became pregnant. Everything was going Mark's way. He had a lovely wife, a beautiful daughter, and come mid-1986, word that he had been appointed to the FBI Academy to become a full-fledged agent. The following February, he got his first assignment, Pikeville, Kentucky. He had barely settled into the town before he got a tip that, if he could nail it down, would wow his bosses and set his career on an unstoppable trajectory. The tip was about a bank robber in his midst. Now, Putnam probably could have protested being assigned to Pikeville, Kentucky as his first post. His wife certainly did. Kathleen even called his superiors and asked that they reconsider sending him there. Her justification was that new agents were usually assigned to big offices where they could watch other more established agents and better learn the ropes. The real reason she wasn't so keen on the assignment, though, was that she hated the idea of living in rural Kentucky. The whole area seemed uncouth, full of hillbillies. She worried about the education their daughter would get. But her pleas fell on deaf ears, and it turned out that was partially because of a misunderstanding. Somewhere along the line, the agency got its wires crossed and believed that Mark had previously served as a state trooper, suggesting he had more law enforcement experience than he really had. Kathy had to soothe herself with the knowledge that agents could typically ask for transfers after about 2 years. On the other hand, Mark seemed fine with the assignment. He immediately began touring the area, getting to know the hollers and learning what he could from Daniel Brennan, the special agent in charge of Pikeville. The truth was, Brennan didn't seem too keen on teaching much. He was nearing retirement age and didn't show much interest in fighting area crime anymore. He would rather spend afternoons on his boat. Mark found himself drowning in work, answering phones, handling local police requests, documenting tips about crimes. He knew that to foster those tips, he had to be approachable. So he made a point to integrate himself into the area. He joined a local Catholic church, coached soccer at the local YMCA, even spent Friday nights at Pikeville High School watching football games. FBI Agent Huggins again.
But despite all that, Mark, he hit the ground running down there. He came in with a good attitude. He worked hard.
Kathy, who was soon pregnant with child number 2, found this all a bit annoying. She later complained to a reporter that the area was just backwoods. It had no decent restaurants, no good dining, no museum. She'd been raised with more money than Mark. She said, quote, "I was used to civilization. You couldn't even get in your car to drive. It was only a matter of time before you were caught in the mountains, and I was scared to death to drive in them." End quote. Still, she was supportive of Mark and knew he was working on important cases that could lead to advancement in his career. In December 1987, she left Pikeville to go back to her family in Connecticut, where she gave birth to the couple's first son, Mark Jr. Kathy decided to stay with her family for several months after the delivery, so Mark was on his own. He made more inroads with the locals and got tips about drug traffickers in the area. The big case he wanted to crack, though, centered on a series of bank robberies in both Kentucky and West Virginia. Putnam and Brennan were convinced that one crew was responsible for the majority of the robberies because they overlapped in several ways. The robbers used sawed-off shotguns, wore ski masks, and escaped in stolen vehicles that they abandoned after the heists. Soon, Putnam zeroed in on Cat Eyes Lockhart as the crew's possible leader. It made total sense. Lockhart had pulled off a big heist before and seemed dumb enough to keep doing it again and again. Putnam started tailing Lockhart, which quickly led him to the doorstep of one Susan Daniels Smith. It so happened that a county deputy named Bert Hatfield, there's that name again, knew Susan pretty well. She had worked as an informant for him in some of his drug cases. So when Agent Putnam asked Deputy Hatfield about the known bank robber living in Susan's house, Hatfield got an idea. Maybe Susan could become an informant for the feds. Putnam said he doubted she would be easily convinced. Hatfield said, "You'd be surprised. All you have to do to win Susan over is offer enough money." So Hatfield helped arrange a meeting between Susan, Kenneth, and Putnam. Now, Kenneth wasn't interested in ratting on Cat Eyes at all. And he didn't want his ex-wife, who was still kind of sort of his real wife, doing it either. He especially didn't like the idea of his wife working specifically with Putnam because at that first meeting the three of them had, it seemed like Susan was flirting with the agent. And weirder still, it seemed Putnam was flirting back. Those two discussed possibly working together out of Kenneth's earshot, so all he had to go on was the length of the meeting and the body language that he could see. But Susan's sister Shelby said later that, yeah, there indeed were sparks flying. Putnam teased Susan about her southern accent. She teased him about how he spoke so proper-like. After the meeting, Kenneth was relentless. "Stay away from that guy, Susan. Don't turn red." Susan said Putnam offered her $5,000 and she'd do what she damn well pleased. Accused of flirting with the agent, she scoffed. Mark Putnam was a professional, she said. This arrangement was just business. It paid off for Putnam. Susan fed him information about the comings and goings of Cat Eyes, who robbed the Farrells Creek branch of the First National Bank of Pikeville on September 10, 1987. Wearing a ski mask, he handed a pillowcase to a teller, ordered her to skip with the die packs, and then herded workers and customers into the vault. This haul was considerably smaller than the one that had landed him in prison the last time. He made off with $12,000, some of which was stained by a die pack the teller had slipped in. Cat Eyes was identified by another bank teller after the robber exchanged a wad of the stained bills. He was indicted in October 1987 and convicted the next January, in part thanks to Susan's testimony against him. He was sentenced to 57 years in prison. Though her testimony had been carefully orchestrated, rumors were starting to spread that she might have set Cat Eyes up. Her family worried her life might be in danger. Susan shrugged it off. She insisted the FBI would protect her. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Hims.
Lots of guys have ED.
There, you said it.
I did, because it's true. Millions of guys deal with it at some point, and way too many people still act like it's some rare, embarrassing thing.
Or they convince themselves it's just stress or exhaustion or getting older.
Right, and sometimes it is, but at a certain point you start thinking maybe you should actually do something about it.
Which is where Hims comes in.
Hims connects you with licensed healthcare providers online so you can get access to legitimate ED treatment options from home. No awkward appointments, no pharmacy lines. You complete a simple online intake, a provider reviews your information, and if treatment is right for you, it ships directly to your front door in discreet packaging.
So the whole thing is private and straightforward.
And that includes sildenafil, the generic version of Viagra, available through Hims at up to 95% less than the brand name version.
Which is a pretty dramatic difference.
It is. The whole process is designed to make getting care feel easy instead of intimidating.
Which is really what a lot of people need.
To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/COTC. That's hims.com/COTC for your free online visit.
hims.com/COTC. Prescription required. See website for details and important safety information. Sildenafil is the generic version of Viagra. Viagra is a registered trademark of Viatris Specialty LLC. Hims is not affiliated with or endorsed by Viatris. Susan Daniels Smith was thrilled with her new gig as an FBI informant. Agent Mark Putnam had not only paid her for help in the case, but he had promised her that if anyone tried to retaliate, he could get her into the Federal Witness Protection Program, or WITSEC. She could finally be free of Kenneth and of Freeburn in one fell swoop. She would get a new name and start a new life with her 2 kids. But there were 2 problems with that plan. First, Mark had no intention of following through on it. And second, that's not the path Susan really wanted to take anyway. She was daydreaming about a different future, one that involved Mark leaving his wife Kathy and making Susan the new Mrs. Putnam. It wasn't as outlandish a fantasy as it might seem. After all, Mark and Susan had started sleeping together almost right after they met. Kenneth might have been an abusive jerk, but he was an observant one. The affair began during a meetup in Mark's car. The 2 had met to chat about Cat Eyes Lockhart, and, wouldn't you know it, one thing led to another. Mark would later say that Susan had seduced him, which, sure, that's possible. But I have the feeling Mark wasn't terribly tough to seduce. His wife Kathy was miserable in Pikeville and didn't hide it. When she came back after her stint away to give birth to Mark Jr., she was cranky and bitter about it. Some reporting on this case makes her seem unlikable in this regard, but think about it. She had been uprooted from her Connecticut home to support her husband's career, hated where they were living, and was left lonely much of the time because he insisted on going to freaking high school football games instead of staying home Friday nights with her and their 2 young children. It had to have been awful for her. And he was the type of guy who would cheat on her with an informant, so I'm guessing there were maybe other elements of their relationship that were less than satisfying to her too. Now, investigators in this case would later blame Susan entirely for the affair. Here's Agent Huggins.
So she was kind of a difficult person to deal with, and Mark, up until a point, did a good job of keeping her under control. Everything was going good until she was always trying to get him to get involved with her sexually, and he kept resisting that up for as long as he finally could. Then he stepped over the line on that one occasion, and that ended up being the downfall for everybody.
Stepped over the line on that one occasion. Yeah, okay, buddy. It wasn't one time. Mark and Susan began a torrid affair. They would do it in his car, in cheap motel rooms, sometimes in Mark's home when Kathy had taken the kids back to Connecticut to see her family. Susan shared intimate details of the affair with her sister Shelby, who frankly got sick of hearing how hot Mark was, how great a lover he was, how they couldn't get enough of each other. Shelby was not a fan of the relationship. She wanted better for Susan than Kenneth, but this is not what she had in mind. Susan, though, was head over heels. She bought herself nicer clothes and worked to soften her accent so she would sound more refined to him. She chopped her hair off to her shoulders because Mark liked shorter hair on women. She got her locks frosted and her body tanned at a local salon. It wasn't tough to see what she saw in Mark. Huggins said,
Susan Smith had a terrible life. Up to that point, her husband was abusive. She'd been in drugs. She had no money, and she was just really desperate.
Having this handsome, athletic, accomplished FBI agent pay her some attention made her feel special. As Kathy got more jaded with her husband, she spent more time away in Connecticut, giving Susan more opportunity to stay at the fancy FBI man's home. She got very comfortable there. Too comfortable. She told Shelby that Mark was gearing up to leave Kathy and marry her. Meanwhile, Susan was still dealing drugs. She said Mark not only had no problem with it, he encouraged it. He would look the other way while she delivered him tips on other dealers. She told Shelby she was untouchable. No one would mess with her so long as the FBI was in her corner. The truth was, though, after Lockhart's conviction, Mark was running out of use for her. Professionally, at least. He had tapped her a few times to help with peripheral cases, but it's not ideal for law enforcement to use the same informants again and again and again. It's one thing for them to pass along tips from inside of the criminal world, but once they start openly testifying in multiple cases, it gives defense lawyers an opening to attack their credibility as professional snitches. Susan was getting paid after all. It wasn't nearly as much as she felt she was owed, but she cleared several $1,000s in her side gig as an informant. Beyond that, though, Mark had another issue with Susan. As fun as their trysts were, she was becoming a bit suffocating and demanding. While she never told him, maybe he sensed that she was growing overly attached and desperate to keep him close. Around Christmas of 1988, she went off birth control. She told her sister Shelby that getting pregnant would be her Christmas gift to Mark, which is a sign to me that she, too, probably sensed he was pulling away. And she was right. Mark and his wife Kathy were planting seeds with the FBI that would get them transferred away from Pikeville soon. Kathy had reported several bomb threats and menacing phone calls made to their quaint home. The agency routinely moved agents to new assignment locations when it seemed their lives were in danger. Yet throughout January 1989, with Kathy and the kids with her family in Connecticut, Mark had Susan practically move in with him, where she told Shelby about their marathon sex sessions and how she served him breakfast topless. She said it was as if the two were already an old married couple, spending their nights curled up on the couch in the den watching TV shows. Now, you would think, with Susan telling practically anyone who would listen about her affair with Mark, someone would have blabbed to the right person. I mean, Susan was even telling Mark's new partner, a guy named Ron Poole, who replaced Daniel Brennan, that she and Mark were in love. But most people didn't believe her. Now, this part of the case is wild. Even Shelby, her sister, and Bo, one of her brothers, figured she must be exaggerating. Bo, who had literally driven Susan multiple times from her home to Pikeville for trysts, said doubt crept in because while he had seen Susan climb into a car with Mark, he had never seen the two being romantic together. And Susan did have a previous history of embellishing stories about her love life. They knew she was working with Mark, and they knew she was spending a lot of time away from home, but they weren't 100% convinced that their relationship was as hot and heavy as she made it out to be. One person who was convinced, though, was Mark's partner, Ron Poole. So, surely he went to his FBI bosses and said, "Hey, Mark's violating our rules about handling informants," right? Of course not. Not even after he himself saw Mark and Susan hugging each other, nor after he noticed that Susan's car would be parked near Mark's house whenever Kathy was out of town. Susan did get pregnant in January 1989, as she had hoped to, but she miscarried that pregnancy early on. The FBI later found documents showing that she had a dilation and curettage procedure, which is commonly performed after a miscarriage or abortion. Susan told Shelby immediately afterward that she would try again. Kenneth had known about the pregnancy, and he knew damn well he wasn't the father, so he was as convinced as Poole that Susan was indeed sleeping with Mark, and he was none too pleased. He didn't merely threaten to expose the affair, he took steps to do it, calling Kathy 3 separate times to tell her her husband was sleeping with Susan. But Kathy didn't believe him. Kenneth alerted a lawyer, too, and provided recordings he had surreptitiously made of Susan talking about the affair. The lawyer, Will Scott, never listened to the tapes, later saying, quote, "I thought Kenneth was strung out. I thought he was paranoid at the time, and I suspected maybe he was in trouble. I just couldn't believe him. It was so preposterous that an FBI agent would be doing this, I just didn't give it any attention." End quote. Then Kenneth called Terry Hulse, a higher-up agent at the FBI office in Louisville, to report the affair. Hulse didn't find Kenneth credible. It could have all proved to be a moot point. Apparently, Kathy's complaints and bomb threats had their intended effect. The FBI agreed to transfer Mark to Florida in late February 1989, around the same time Susan told Mark she was pregnant with his child. In April, Mark moved away. This could have been a breakup, but no. Susan told her sister that Mark promised he would work something out with her. He would be back, he said. While the Putnams settled into Fort Lauderdale, Susan sank into a depression. She pestered Poole nearly daily until he finally gave in and gave her Mark's phone number. She was undeterred when Kathy was the one who answered. Mark called her back. After that, Susan began calling constantly. Mark must have realized the distance between them wasn't going to be much of a deterrent for her. Meanwhile, things with Kenneth were turning volatile. On May 7, 1989, Susan filed a warrant of arrest charging her ex with terroristic threatening. She said he had threatened to shoot her and tried to run her over with his car. She told Poole she desperately needed to get out of Freeburn. Maybe he and Mark could finally get her into Witsec, possibly in Florida where Mark now lived. Poole put her off. Maybe, Susie. We'll see. Finally, on February 5th, 1989, Mark returned to Kentucky, ostensibly to wrap up a car theft case he'd been working. Poole called Susan to let her know Mark had arrived and agreed to pick her up to bring her to Pikeville to see him. She excitedly grabbed some makeup and clothes and envisioned a romantic reunion at the hotel the FBI was paying for. But Mark didn't invite her to stay in his room as she had expected. She was put in a separate room at the Landmark Motel. When she called Shelby on June 7th to touch base, she said the sex had been great, but Mark refused to talk about child support or anything about the baby. Shelby said, "Sis, you're making a fool of yourself. Just come home." Susan at first refused, but then on the 8th, agreed that she would have Mark drive her home. That's when the phone calls stopped. Shelby reported Susan missing on June 16th. She was never heard from again. Mark Putnam stayed at the Landmark Motel until June 25th as he finished testifying in the chop shop case that brought him back to town. Susan's room had been emptied on the 9th. Told by Poole that Shelby was beside herself with worry, Mark called the sister once and said he hadn't seen Susan since the 7th, though Shelby didn't think that was true. Susan had told her on the 8th that she'd seen Mark that very day. But Mark said the last he talked to her was the day before when Susan said she planned to connect with another set of friends driving in from out of state. He didn't know why she left her clothing and makeup behind in the motel room, but he was sure she would turn up sooner or later. Shelby, her siblings, and her parents could do nothing but worry and wait. When they would press the FBI to see what was happening on the case, they were brushed off. Susan had probably run off, they said. Shelby said that while Susan wasn't Mother of the Year, she would not straight up abandon her children. She'd at least call to let them know what was happening. Then Shelby wondered if maybe this was how it happened with people in WITSEC. Maybe they were whisked away without a trace and family members would never have any clue what had happened to them. That actually brought Shelby a little comfort. The idea that maybe Susan had started a fresh life, just like she'd long dreamed about. The leaving without her kids part still didn't seem right, but maybe Susan needed the FBI to pay off Kenneth, their father, and circle back for them. For its part, the local media did nothing with news of the disappearance. I searched the area newspaper archives and found no mention, not even a short brief, about her disappearance in all of 1989. Now, Shelby got local police to do a little digging, but when they interviewed Mark, the agent told them he wasn't sleeping with Susan and only knew her as an informant in the Cat Eyes Lockhart case. Sure, there had been rumors floating around, but he said Susan started those herself. She wasn't the most reliable person, he said, and she seemed to harbor some unrequited feelings for him. The Pikeville police seemed to buy that. They did ask for Mark's alibi, though, for the night of June 8th. Mark said he had been at the theater watching the movie Roadhouse. If police had bothered to check out that alibi, they would have learned that Roadhouse had left the theater the day before Mark said he saw it. For an excruciating year, the case went cold. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Lumi. I can't drink much anymore. I get headaches straight away. I still want to take the edge off now and then, but most edibles get me way too high. Then I tried Lumi gummies, which make me feel just right. Consistent, mellow, and super delicious, Lumi gummies are specifically designed to make you feel good, not stoned. Whether you're looking for an end-of-the-day de-stressor, a midday mood boost, or getting the best sleep ever, Lumi gummies has a strain that's right for you. They also come in 1 milligram or 5 milligram gummies, so you can get the exact dose you're looking for.
Which is one of the biggest differences for me. A lot of edibles can go from relaxed to why is time moving weird very quickly.
Right, and with Lumi, I know what I'm getting. I've especially liked the lower dose gummies because they let me relax without feeling foggy or wiped out the next day.
Which matters when everybody's already burned out and trying to juggle work, end of school chaos, and all the other stuff piling up this time of year.
Sometimes you just want your brain to stop running 12 tabs at once.
The flavors are actually good.
They really are, which isn't always true with edibles. I appreciate that they offer different strains depending on what you're looking for.
Basically customizable calm.
Lumi gummies are available nationwide. Go to lumigummies.com, that's L-U-M-I, gummies.com, and use code COTC for 30% off your order. Again, that's L-U-M-I, gummies.com, code COTC. lumigummies.com, code COTC. Shelby Ward fought tooth and nail to get law enforcement to take her sister Susan's disappearance seriously. Instead, they interrogated her and gave her a polygraph. She passed. "How about you give one to Mark Putnam?" she asked. They refused, saying that the most obvious suspect was Kenneth Smith, Susan's husband. "Okay," Shelby said, "then rule him out. Give him a polygraph." The Kentucky Commonwealth Police told her they couldn't find Kenneth to even request one, a claim that Shelby found ludicrous because at this point, Kenneth was on home monitoring via an ankle bracelet thanks to a drunken driving conviction. He literally couldn't leave his house without setting off an alarm. It seemed to Shelby that no one cared at all about her sister, a woman who, flawed though she may have been, put her life in danger to help the FBI as an informant and believed her handler had fallen in love with her. Finally, in January 1990, more than 6 months after Susan's disappearance, Commonwealth investigators interrogated Kenneth. After 3 polygraphs and interviews, investigators felt comfortable he wasn't behind Susan's disappearance. So the Commonwealth turned their attention to Mark, who began to evade them with the help of FBI brass. This finally started pissing off the locals. Commonwealth Attorney John Paul Runyon felt like the agency was closing ranks to protect one of their own. He threatened to go to the media, which prompted the Louisville office to kick the matter upstairs to Washington, and a veteran agent named Jim Huggins was assigned to lead an internal investigation. He was the first person in an official capacity who seemed genuinely willing to consider that a fellow agent might have killed Susan. Huggins, of course, didn't want to believe that, but he worked the case anyway, his team methodically pulling phone records, motel receipts, rental car logs. They confirmed that Putnam had rented a Ford Tempo on June 5th and returned it early on June 11th, claiming a coal truck had cracked the windshield on Highway 23. The car was sent to the FBI lab in Washington for inspection. On May 16th, Huggins and two colleagues boarded a plane to Miami to interview Mark directly. They had no body, no physical evidence, no witness. What they had was a year's worth of circumstance and a man who, unbeknownst to anyone in that Miami office, had been falling apart from the inside for 12 long months. That interview in Miami lasted 6.5 hours. Here's Huggins talking about it on FBI Case File Review.
The very first question I asked when I started the interview, I said, Mark, how old is Susan? And he said, Jim, she was 28. And when he said was, it kind of hit me like, wait a minute, he's talking in the past tense here.
Huggins kept it measured and non-confrontational. He knew that if Putnam felt cornered, he'd shut down entirely. And Putnam was good. He was calm, detailed, professional. He walked the investigators through his movements in Pikeville almost minute by minute, a year after the fact. And that was actually part of the problem. Most people can't recall with that kind of precision what they did last week. I mean, think about it. What kind of timeline could you construct for, say, last Tuesday? Here Putnam was reconstructing a year-old timeline with the fluency of someone who'd been rehearsing it. He also made a mistake. He mentioned, unprompted, that he had cut his hand on a shelf nail in the garage of his old Pikeville residence, and that there might be blood in the rental car because of it. He was trying to get ahead of the evidence he assumed they had, but they didn't, not yet. As the interview neared 7 hours, Huggins said,
Did you kill Susan? No, Jim, I would never do that. I couldn't do that. So I decided, well, there's no need continuing. We were running out of steam, as he was too. So I said, well, we'll continue this in the morning. So we left, and I said, by the way, Mark, would you consider having a polygraph given to you? He said, oh, yeah, no problem. Be glad to.
A few days later, Putnam flew to Washington for a polygraph. He failed it. The next night, he met Kathy at a restaurant and told her there might be a problem about something he had done in Pikeville. She braced herself for a confession of an affair, but the question she asked was much bigger. She asked him point blank if he had killed Susan. He said yes. She hit him so hard, he fell out of the chair. On May 22nd, Putnam resigned from the FBI and hired an attorney who called Commonwealth attorney John Paul Runyon. Putnam wanted to make a deal. For Runyon, this was a tough call. On one hand, he wanted an answer to the question, what happened to Susan Daniels Smith? On the other, he desperately needed Mark to confess because he otherwise had no case since he didn't have a body or any physical evidence. As Runyon later said, quote, "It was the first time in my 28-year career that I had a man wanting to confess to murder, and I could not charge him for it," end quote. The negotiations took 3 weeks. Runyon was amenable to a plea deal, but he wanted Mark to serve 16 years. Putnam's attorney pushed back hard, initially offering 8 years. Runyon held firm, despite knowing that Mark could walk and take all that he knew with him. In the end, Runyon got what he wanted. On June 4th, 1990, Mark Putnam led investigators to a ravine off an old coal mining road about 9 miles north of Pikeville. After hours of searching through overgrown brush, they found a human skull. A short distance away, the rest of a decomposed skeleton. A gold necklace found alongside the remains, one Shelby had lent Susan before she left for Pikeville that last time, confirmed what everybody already knew. Now, Mark's version of events manages to make him sound like more of a victim than a perpetrator, so I take it with a grain of salt. He said that while he and Susan were alone in his rental car, she began hounding him about her baby and child support. Todd Grande again.
He attempted to negotiate with Susan, telling her that pending the results of a paternity test, he and his wife would adopt a baby. Susan was not happy with this proposal. She flew into a rage and attacked Mark. Mark strangled Susan with his bare hands. He claimed that he tried to resuscitate her unsuccessfully. Mark put Susan's body in the trunk of his vehicle. The next day, he dumped her naked body in a ravine near an old coal mine about 9 miles north of Pikeville, Kentucky.
His rental car's broken windshield, by the way, he said that came from Susan kicking it from the inside during their fight. On June 12, 1990, Mark pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter, the first FBI agent in the Bureau's history to be convicted of a homicide. Susan's family was furious. They had wanted a murder charge and hadn't been consulted before Runyon made the deal. Shelby Ward was so enraged, she showed up to Mark's sentencing hearing with a .38 caliber handgun. She said later she had no intention of using it. She'd just forgotten it was in her purse, wrapped in a sock, loaded. Mark served just 10 years of his 16-year sentence. He was released in 2000 for good behavior, a model prisoner, the warden said. His wife Kathy stood by him but wasn't around to welcome him home. She died in 1998 while Mark was still incarcerated of organ failure linked to alcoholism. She was 38 years old. Their 2 children were raised by her parents in Connecticut. Before she died, Kathy told reporters that her husband's only mistake was sleeping with Susan and that she forgave him for that. She was certain Susan was the pursuer in the relationship, and Susan's behavior afterward would have driven any reasonable man to his breaking point. But when you know Susan's full story, it's hard not to see her for what she was. A vulnerable woman looking for a way out of her sad circumstances. And makes sense that she would have trusted the savvy, sophisticated FBI agent who promised her the world. Time and again, she told her sister Shelby that as long as she was working with the FBI, she was safe. No one would get to her. She was completely oblivious to the notion that the danger might come from the FBI itself. The agency threw a brand new agent, barely a year out of Quantico, into a 2-person office in an isolated corner of Appalachian Kentucky with virtually no supervision. His partner, Ron Poole, saw enough to know something was wrong and said nothing. Kenneth Smith called the Louisville FBI office and was dismissed as a paranoid drug addict. An attorney received recordings of Susan talking about the affair and never even listened to them. In fact, they were tossed out before the case ever even reached trial. The system that was supposed to protect people like Susan Daniels Smith, that was, in fact, actively using her, failed her at every turn. Mark Putnam put his hands around her throat, but the FBI gifted him the conditions that made it possible. Susan Daniels Smith grew up in a holler in Pike County, dreaming of a life somewhere else. She wanted new clothes and a parasol and a future that looked different from the one she had been handed. She found what she thought was her ticket out. Instead, it cost her her life. To research this case, I read Aphrodite Jones's 1992 book, The FBI Killer, which drew on original interviews with Susan's family, Kenneth Smith, and others close to the case. I supplemented that with contemporaneous newspaper coverage pulled from newspaper archives, including reporting from the Associated Press and regional Kentucky outlets that covered the investigation and guilty plea in real time. The Hartford Courant's coverage of Putnam's 2000 prison release was also helpful for the aftermath details. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Head to www.grabbagcollab.com for exclusive content related to this show and access to other series on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and sometimes my child, Hunt Van Benskoten. Other music comes from Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, please help us out by rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts. Also tell your friends. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're @centuriespod, and you can find us on the Crimes of the Centuries Facebook page.